Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then please do hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and please do leave us a review. It really does help make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Today, we're joined by one of the UK's most resilient businessmen. Rupert Soames, now chairman of the Confederation of British Industry, has built a 40-year career running towards the gunfire rather than away from it. Perhaps no surprise, given that he's the grandson of Winston Churchill. Rupert's career started unconventionally with a stint as a DJ at Charles and Diana's wedding before working his way up from the shop floor at General Electric to senior management over 16 years. He later took the helm at Agreco after the sudden death of its CEO, leading the company through a period of crisis. At Serco, he pulled off one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds in recent history. And last year, he stepped in to steady the ship at the CBI after a turbulent period, and its recovery is already well underway. But behind his decades of success, there have been moments of personal resilience as well as professional. Rupert Soames, OBE, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing well.
Good. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. Rupert, we're gonna talk about those business crises that you've lived through, navigated, managed so brilliantly during the course of your career. But let's set the scene a little. I touched on your family in the intro. Your father, Christopher Soames, was a highly accomplished, very effective man who held a number of political roles, including in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet and as European Commissioner. And your mother, Mary, Baroness Soames, an incredible woman, a life of public service. Both, I imagine, had a big impact on your worldview, if I can put it that way.
Yes, they certainly did. And they were wonderful parents, but very busy parents. And I also had 4 siblings and who were quite a lot older than me, so I was a mistake that came along at the end. But as my mother said, a very much loved mistake. But so they were brought up slightly as a pack, and I was sort of trailing along behind, saying, me, what about me?
So the gap between your...
5 years between my adored elder sister
right.
and me is 5 years, and there's 10 years between me and my adored elder brother.
I mean, you say it with a smile on your face, the mistake piece, but...
because it's funny, because I just, to have 4 children and think that that's, you're done, and then suddenly another one comes along. Anyway, I never felt unloved in any way, but it was a stick with which I could occasionally beat my mother.
Yes, so parents, busy people would be an understatement.
Yeah, but I mean, I had a very privileged upbringing. I had a generally fabulous education. I was sent to boarding school at 7, and coincided with my parents going to Paris, to my father to be ambassador there. And so I thought that, lots of people of my generation and my upbringing did that. But it was a boarding school, and it had some of the sins of boarding schools, including some masters who had an entirely unhealthy appetite for young boys. And so it wasn't completely plain sailing from that point of view. And the only reason why I mention it, because I was subject to some very poor behaviour by people who should
You were abused, Rupert?
Yeah, I was. But
goodness, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Well, there's nothing to be sorry about. It happened, but the only reason I bring it up, because I'm completely unembarrassed about it. Many worse things have happened to many people, but I think that it was maybe part of helping me learn behaviours and coping mechanisms, which proved to be useful in later life. The idea that hiding things and not talking about them is a really bad idea. Letting things become a sort of sepsis in your brain. And when I watch some of these inquiries into historical allegations of sex abuse at schools or whatever, my heart goes out to the people who in their 40s and 50s are still harbouring truths that go back late into their lives and have probably never talked about it. And I can only imagine the pain that you get from that if you've never talked about it, if it has been allowed to grow as an incubus inside your brain and then suddenly, age 40 or 50, it comes out. I mean, it must be horrific. Whereas me, being a happy-go-lucky sort of chappie, was making jokes about it at dinner parties when I was 16.
Really? You never really sought to conceal it, hide it?
No, I absolutely never.
Your parents were aware?
No, my parents absolutely were aware. And I think that it must be a difficult thing for parents to know that they've sent their child to a school where bad things have happened. But I never felt remotely abandoned or unloved or anything like that. And it truthfully wasn't a big issue for me. It's only, fun enough, when I've grown older and perhaps more reflective about when people like you come and ask me questions about sort of what is this about resilience? How do you imagine, and how can you know anything about resilience when you had such an incredibly privileged child, which I did. And I think that I just think that being able to speak about it and unembarrassed about it also has been helpful in terms of leading to resilience, because we all are children of our childhood. So we all have things that happen when you're in the Jesuits used to say, give me a child till they're 7 and then you can have them. So I don't know. I don't want to make a big thing about it. It's not been a huge thing in my daily life. But if I meet somebody like you, who has had huge difficulties in their lives.
Nothing in comparison.
It is. No. I don't want to overstate it. I mean, we can be over-sympathetic to this, but it's sort of the comparing the notes of where that resilience may come from. From me, it comes from the idea that always look on the bright side, be cheerful about life, and crack on.
So when we look at the period of your sort of early childhood through school, were people aware sort of whilst you were at school, or is it all? You say 16. You were. Yeah,
I mean, my parents. I mean, there's a school. One of the schoolmasters went to prison.
Right.
So it was
confronted.
It was confronted in a sort of 1960s sort of way.
Right.
But it was confronted, and you'll know that since then, I mean, now in the last 10, 15 years, there's a lot more come out about what was going on.
Yes. You were at Eton.
Nothing bad ever happened at Eton. It was actually a prep school. It was between the ages of 7 and 12.
Right.
And I was at Eton, and
had a very good.
I was generally an unpopular boy, but I would say that I was. I enjoyed it. I was able to do what I really wanted to do.
Right.
And it was a place that opened up tremendous possibilities for me.
So the fact that it was known, confronted by presumably your parents, there was a process. This master ended up being prosecuted, imprisoned.
Yeah.
Also allowed you within the family and for your family as well, who must have been, that your parents must have been devastated to discover this was happening.
I really don't. If they were, I think it was just sort of, Rupert's fine. And Rupert was fine. Rupert was absolutely fine. And we all made a bit of a joke about it and marched on. But the only reason at all for talking about it is that the sense that there are still people out there who haven't had as an easier time as I have.
Yeah.
As I had.
Well, look, I just thank you for sharing that, Rupert. And this is a conversation about resilience in the business context. And what seems clear from what you've said is that it's an important element of the story, because it's fueled your resilience to a degree.
I think what it also fueled was whether it was that or whatever, or just being the youngest, was to take a different path. Because when I went to Oxford, it was the time of the Big Bang, and nearly all my contemporaries and my friends from university went to work for banks, and I didn't want to go on that path, partly because I recognised they were cleverer than me.
Was that really it?
Yeah, no, they were. So there were some amazingly intelligent, clever people there. But I just wanted to do something different. I'd always taken a path slightly differently trod, so at university at Oxford, I was a DJ, and I was doing the president of the Oxford Union for 3 nights a week, and I was doing the music at a nightclub called Annabelle's 2 nights a week, and it was quite hard work. Did not leave a lot of time for social life, but so this idea of working hard and playing hard and getting. I came out of Oxford longing to leave and get into the world, but knowing that I would not make a good banker.
Right.
I was pretty sure by that stage that I was...
But clear that business is where you wanted to be.
I'm clear that manufacturing and technology is where I wanted to.
Where did that passion come from?
I don't know. But I got offered a job, and I go down, and I have this... Do you know... I don't know whether you've ever seen those children's books, the sort of cutaway books, called The Way Things Work. And you get a cruise liner cut away in half, and you can see there are the engines and there are the things. I'm insatiably curious about the way things work. And one of the joys of my working life is I've worked in so many different businesses. I've worked in software companies, I've worked in manufacturing, weighing scales, I've worked in rental businesses, I've worked in government services business. And the joy of constantly discovering the way things work is one of the things that's been so much fun in my life.
And that was just in you. I mean,
I think I think a sense of natural curiosity. The other thing is, which I feel really strongly about, is I was incredibly lucky to be brought up in the countryside. And one of the things about the countryside is everybody treats each other the same. I mean, there's you have to get on with everybody. I spent a large proportion of my time in the holidays when I was a schoolchild going around helping do artificial insemination of cattle, because the guy who lived at the bottom near our house, I used to go around in his car aged 9 and 10, helping do AI on cows. Now, when you are covered in a large dose of cow manure from an angry Jersey cow, it doesn't knock out your airs and graces.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I just get so much pleasure from is the idea that people are okay to talk to me from whatever background and whatever. And that's one of the things that has been wonderful about my children, who were all brought up. We kept home in one place, which was sort of between Aylesbury and Oxford and Bicester. And whilst I worked and travelled around, living in the countryside and being brought up with country people and farmers, is a privilege and a background that suited me well, and then going actually into factories and making things and seeing the and the pride of saying this box. I mean, I was working there during the Falklands conflict.
Right.
And used to have to go and you get a piece of equipment that was for a Harrier jump jet air display, and you had to walk it down the production line as it was made because we had to get it off the Falklands. I mean, how proud can you get? I mean, how sexy can a job be than doing that?
But you're in an environment. Obviously, your family is a political family. It's that road for you must also have been much discussed and been there as an option for you.
So I was obviously very heavily engaged in politics at Oxford because I was president of the union. You don't get to do that without me. But I lost that, and I also had the privilege. My brother was very good at politics, and probably two Soameses were enough in politics.
Did you make that calculation?
Yes, he never for a moment would have dissuaded me from doing it. The other thing is I'm afflicted by a thing is I'm really bad at remembering names and faces.
Right.
Really bad at it. I mean,
it doesn't work well in politics.
Which does not work well in politics. But I love politics. And that's one of the lovely things about in the CBI is you're on the edge of politics and seeing how you see all the fun bits and how fascinating it is. So I'm going to Serco. I've always tried to keep a foot there, but I'm not a professional politician because I'm not good enough at it.
Well, you're incredibly self-effacing about all these things.
No. But I think.
Do you regret?
If you lived with politicians, if you've been brought up with politicians, and seen how really how skilled they have to be. You know this from your work. People always think that politicians are sort of amateurs, that they sort of go around and they lie and cheat and steal. They don't actually. They are highly committed, but it's very, very different in working with a volunteer army. Where actually everybody can any of your colleagues can decide to flounce off out of cabinet any day of the week and go and cause you endless trouble. And I just think when I see politicians who are doing their job well, I hugely respect that. I sometimes wish they gave those of us who had taken a different path and understood actually running businesses is pretty difficult and complex and multifaceted, and they're just different disciplines.
Yes.
And it's quite hard to be good at both. There are very few examples of people who've been good at both of those things.
I'm interested to ask that question specifically. Just before I do, though, was the voice of the shadow of your grandfather part of the deliberation on politics as well? Our greatest politician. It wasn't, because the other thing is I don't have his name. Yes. So he was my grandfather, but I'm called a Soames. So people didn't. But I think one of the things is certainly true that for at least half my career, people thought that the reason for my success was who I knew, not what I knew. But equally, I had then had huge benefits, which was I had something to be proud of, a love of history, a love of the English language, wanting to write. I love writing. Well, occasionally go and write op-eds and stuff. I had great pleasure doing that, communicating. And it wasn't really until I think that I got to sort of halfway through the 40 years of my industrial that people stopped saying, well, you can't be completely incompetent. Again, the self-effacement, but it's the skills.
With good reasons.
But if you were to look back at yourself at the start of your career, the drive we've talked a little bit about, but your key skill or key skills. I mean, I think it's already coming across in the short time that we've been talking. Communication you're really good at it. I mean, has that always been the case? Have you always had, from that ability to be able to talk to anyone, deal with anyone? You just described it eloquently in terms of the upbringing that you had, the farm, dealing with anyone and everyone. Is that something that you took into the workplace when you joined GEC? And was that, would you say, one of the skills that helped you progress?
I think genuine curiosity to know what people are doing in their jobs, genuine respect. You can't fake respect, but when I go and see somebody doing their job well, and you think how bloody good they are at it, I am curious and fascinated, but also very respectful, because they're doing things I couldn't do and I could learn from. And I think there's always this sense that you can learn from people. But I am a huge believer when people talk about culture. Culture is about behaviour, and it's about learned behaviour. And one of the things that I say to people, particularly if you are a business leader, is that people watch your behaviour, with intense interest. And it doesn't matter if you go around and say, we want all these highfalutin things. We want people to behave really well. We want people to be nice to each other. We want people to do this and that and the other. If when they see your own behaviour, and they see something different. If you say, we want people to be committed to the enterprise, and if they see you airing off and not working very hard, then that you get a dissonance. And it's the quickest way to lose an organisation is to have, as a leader, is if your personal behaviour is not aligned to what you're asking them to do. And when people sometimes say Soames runs towards gunfire, I just happens to be that people have asked me to go and do jobs. It's not that I run towards it. I've been said, would you like to go and do this? And having arrived there, but I think I have of not asking people to do things that I wouldn't do myself. And I've been at it long enough for people to know that almost everything I ask people, I already have done. So whether it's going and debt collecting in the Yemen, or sleeping in a container in Angola, or going and walking around prison corridors trying to make sure that prisons are decent places, I have done those things, and I can look and what it brings me is not a holier than thou, it's respect for the people who do it. Understanding just how incredibly good people are at their jobs and how hard they work. And one of the things that I occasionally ask, Rupert, what's the secret of your success? And the one thing I never say is working hard. Because there are millions and millions and millions and millions of people who are holding down 3 jobs, raising a family, and probably got a mum at home who's got dementia or something like that. They work hard. Hard work is not, it may be a condition for success, but it's not a guarantor of success. And one of my favourite expressions is Henry Ford's thing about, what's the secret of success? Rise early, work hard, strike oil. And it's this thing that you need to strike oil, and not being disrespectful to people in whose lives they have not struck oil.
Yes. In
terms of had luck, that luck has not gone their way, that great big pantechnicons have come crashing down the road and smashed their lives to bits, sort of thing. And it was one of the reasons why I feel quite strongly about asylum seekers, because I had the privilege when I was Serco of helping organise the accommodation of 40,000 asylum seekers in the UK, and seeing the complexities of that situation, and also going and talking to people who had picked themselves up and had walked from Afghanistan or from the Sudan, had crossed the Mediterranean or Turkey, walked here to get here in search of a better life, which, in decades, generations gone past, people used to do that going from Ireland to the United States and everything. And it's not a political point, but it's this point of treating people with a modicum of respect.
Rupert, you very generously offered to sort of look at 3 case studies, if you like, from your career and analyse them from a crisis point of view. Let's start with Agreco. You moved across as chief exec in 2003 and arrived into a company that was in trauma, really, following the unexpected, very tragic death of its chief exec. Just tell us what you sort of found on arrival.
A traumatised organisation, bereft, and it was an organisation that has been so much grown in the mould and with the culture of Phil Harrower, who was a tremendous, he had a wonderful career. He left school at 16. He was the absolute reverse of me. He'd left school at 16. He'd gone in as an apprentice into engineering and then got into power generation. He then moved to the States and built up this amazing company. And he was revered, and rightly so. And then little la-di-da Soames turns up, Eton, Oxford, and an accent that sort of expressed that. I've never been able to get rid of that, despite my attempts. And to win over the confidence and trust, and particularly since these were people who really knew about their business. And they said, what do you know about generators? What do you know about rental? You've never been in a rental business. How do you know about this? And I think word got around quite quickly around the organisation that I was the third choice, because the other 2 candidates had withdrawn and they were desperate for a candidate, so I was there. I was there having been unemployed for a year, having had my second firing.
Right.
So I've been fired twice in my life, and that one before Aggreko was particularly difficult because it took me a year to go and find another job.
There was a job between GC and
Aggreko. I worked for a wonderful company called Mises, which was software. So I got fired from GC and I got fired again from Mises. Can
we talk about that just quickly? I mean, either one or other, or both, perhaps?
Well,
your
it's pretty
reaction
simple.
to it,
I got fired from GC
it?
for trying to buy the company that I was running. I wanted to buy Avery Burkle. And also, after 16 years there, when my hero and mentor, Arnold Weinstock, retired, it was time for me to go as well. And then I left Mises because whether they found me annoying or whatever, but it was genuinely about maybe a different view of where the company would go. But I remain to this day completely respectful and devoted to Kevin Lomax and John Sussons, who were my bosses there, and I don't blame them at all for firing me because I was quite annoying.
How did it impact you?
So I was unemployed for a year, and that needed a certain amount of resilience, going around whistling cheerfully as I tramped from job interview to job interview. And luckily, I would have taken anything by the end, but luckily for me, I got offered the job at Agreco following the tragedy of Phil Harrower. If you say what it was like when you get there with a traumatized organisation, an organisation that's looking at why have they chosen this guy, I was incredibly lucky in many respects. One was a guy called Angus Coburn was a finance director there, and that was the start of 20 years of working together with Angus. He was just brilliant, and he not only is he a great finance director, he's a prince amongst people.
And he was in place when you arrived.
He was in place.
Was he one of those who was unconvinced?
Never challenged him at that. And there was also Sheila McNeil, who became my PA there. And these people who had the choice just said, we'll give him a go.
Right.
And they gave me some support. And actually, over a period of time, I was able, I think, to convince people, mainly by going out on job sites and standing at the top of the Tour Montparnasse in France in the freezing cold, looking at an air conditioning unit that was. I mean, it was a wonderful business. Aggreko. It still is a fantastic business, but it wasn't only the Phil Harrower thing. It was also that direction. It had lost its way.
I just want to give people a sense of scale. If they haven't heard of Aggreko, you arrive, I think market cap circa 450 million. When you left, it was 5 billion. Just so we understand the scale of the success.
Yeah, well,
and the scale of the business.
That was the striking oil bit.
Yes.
But that was but it was also, there was another good saying that in a hurricane even turkeys can fly, but we did wobble ourselves over to the part of the beach where we got into the fact that emerging countries had fast-growing economies, were short of power, and colleagues built up this terrific business providing power all the way around the world to emerging countries, and the company grew really, really fast, but it never lost its culture. And the culture was not something that I brought. It was something that was there already. And my big contribution, I think, to Aggreko was not to cock it up, because it had this phenomenal culture of customer service. It was populated by people who saw themselves as the fifth emergency service. When hurricanes hit in Louisiana, when I remember getting a call because we did the power for the London Olympics, and there was a serious threat, a credible threat to cut off power. Somebody said they got into the power stations, could cut off power to the whole of south of England just before the opening ceremony. And we got a call from the authorities saying, can we send the Queen? Because can you guarantee me that there will be power in the stadium? And being able to say, I can guarantee you there will be power in the stadium, come what may. And she went. It was being involved in great events and doing really good engineering as well. It was great fun.
You are, I suspect, somewhat understating your role. You're the chief executive of this business. It is a business in trauma. Yes, it has this incredible culture that you've just described in place. But that culture does need nurturing. That culture does need developing. No culture stands still for long. And however imbued that was on arrival, it needed to be developed. It needed to be nurtured and led through an incredible periods of change. How did you approach that?
I actually think in terms of cultural change, there was more of a job to do at Serco, which we'll come on to. So Aggreko, I just dived into that culture like a warm bath. It was absolute, because we had things, people said they had orange blood. They were unbelievably committed to the thing. And my greatest contribution to the culture at Aggreko was not to mess it up.
Let's look at it.
And to dive into it and to embrace it and to say this is good. This is good, what you care about, caring about, knocking over walls to go and get power to people. It was a lot of heroism in that organisation, and a lot of also really good logistics and manufacturing and design. But it needed a bit of self-confidence, and it needed to get the strategy right. And one of the things I've learned about all the companies that I have been to, well, the two really big ones, Aggreko and Serco, is that you have about 6 months when you arrive somewhere like that to get the broad direction and the strategy right. And you then go, if you get that bit wrong, you can be off by a bit, but if you get that bit wrong and say, we are headed off southwards, and in fact, that's not a good place to go, you're done. And it's one of the things that I say about chief executive. Chief executive come and ask for advice. Well, I say, you got to, the first time you hit that ball of saying where we're headed, you got to be right.
And how do you do that? How do you give yourself the best chance of being right?
Well, the first is to go and listen to people in the company who know what they're doing and go and listen to customers. And then you just have to use your nose. You've got to have good radar. You've got to be good at, I think, being prepared to listen to people for advice. But fundamentally, I mean, I remember vividly in Serco when we were devising the strategy for Serco, which really was strategically in a hell of a hole then, and we were working on it, and the light bulb came on as pizzas came in at 9:30 one night. We were there, and suddenly I got it. I was like, I know what this is. I've got a narrative. And coming back to the communication bit, because a strategy that you can't explain in words, you've got to have a narrative. And it's when the narrative hits the spreadsheet draw, not the drawing, the spreadsheet, the PowerPoint drawing, the boxes. We go and do this, then that, and the other. And then you can bring a narrative together and the words fit. You can say, I can say it. And if the words fit, I do a lot of my thinking is by repeating words, or not so much writing them down, but going over them. And if the words fit, and if it makes sense, then probably it's decent. But I've seen a few times when new CEOs have come in and said, we're going to do zip, and off they go. And it takes you 18 months to find out that you've been going in the wrong direction for 18 months, and then that really is not a good place to be.
Let's move on to Serco then. 2014, you're persuaded to lead Serco.
No, I volunteered.
You volunteered?
Yeah, I put my hand up.
Wow. I mean, I was going to ask you.
I was doing a good job running Agreco.
This was the question I was going to ask. You're obviously you're doing a good job. You're absolutely knocking it out of the park at Agreco, and you decide actually, I fancy that, and we should explain that Serco is a company that at that point that was in pretty serious trouble. So what was the thinking?
I think chief executives are like plutonium. They have a half-life. And for the first half of their life, they're fizzing with energy and good things and warmth. And for the second half of their life, they're a nightmare to dispose of. I wanted to not give anybody the issue of having to dispose of me.
Right.
I felt that it was time for me and for Aggreko. You can just become too embedded, particularly if you are a sort of big personality. And
yes,
there was time to go on. You lose that freshness. By the time you've done your 12th budget review, you lose a bit of the freshness. And I was also I was getting this yen. I wanted to get something in public service that touched more on government. And when I saw what had happened to Serco, I rang up and I said, I think that could just be for me.
Paint the picture for us. The crises were sort of multifaceted. It was a crisis of sort of financing, but it was a reputational crisis on a number of different levels as well.
Came from the reputational crisis.
Yes.
Is that they were accused by their largest customer, by far, which was the British government, of having been dishonest, of having misstated things across a couple of contracts that they had.
This is offenders on tag.
This was partly, it was offenders on a tag, exactly. And the government went at it with a will. To go and show how tough they were going to be and unforgiving they were going to be to suppliers who were, in their view, ripping the taxpayer off. And I don't blame them for they were quite right to do that. But the organisation was the lesson is the damage that the market does to a business when a business has fallen out from its customers is far greater than the damage that the customers can do. So we immediately, I arrived there, and these allegations swirling around, and inquiries and SFO inquiries, and all this sort of beginning to grind into thing, and pretty much straight away. So Angus came with me. We started looking underneath the hood, and there were a whole lot of contracts that had been taken that were losing money. That we had to go and own up to and say, we've not only got these ones over here, we've got a crisis with the government over here where we have got to where we need to make up with them and get to a position where they can trust us. But we've also got all these other contracts over here that are now losing money, where we've signed contracts that we shouldn't have done.
So this is a business in trauma of a very different kind.
Yeah.
What kind of reception was waiting for you on arrival at Serco as compared to Agreco?
I don't know. It was well, obviously, who is this person? He's come from a generator rental company.
You're coming from a business that is absolutely flying.
And what does he know about public services? It has to be said, at that stage, they didn't have a lot of choice. I was appointed CEO. The day I arrived, we had to do an emergency rights issue. It was
day one in the job.
And at Agreco, we had to give a profits warning by day one. We didn't actually have to raise any money. In Serco, we had to raise £120 million on day one. It really was. It was all hands to deck. So we got to... But again, here was an organisation that was traumatised. And it was traumatised by a thing. And there is a slight link here to the CBI, because the people in Serco could not recognise the behaviour that Serco, or a very small part, indeed one contract in Serco, was being accused of doing. Because the people in Serco believed they were doing a good job.
Yes.
They had, and to the extent that the more that you believe that the job that you are doing is of value to society and you've got an important mission, and you then go and discover that, or are told that, actually you're doing a bad job, you are falsifying things, you're stealing taxpayers' money, you're doing all these other things, people say, what? It's a huge and traumatic shock.
Yes. So how did you manage that? What was the approach?
My first approach, which people come up to me after and say, you don't understand the effect that this had, is I got shirts printed, my work shirts printed, like this blue one, that said Serco and proud of it. And the last thing that anybody in Serco was feeling at the time was proud. And having a CEO walking around with a shirt saying Serco, and I'm proud of it. And my emails, Rupert Soames, Serco, and proud of it.
That was your sign-off?
Yeah.
How interesting.
From almost day one. And it got attention of the people, because it diverted the attention, it put into context the fact that the vast majority of stuff that Serco did was really important, providing good services to people at terribly difficult times of their lives, vital services to government. For God's sake, we were helping manage the everything from the nuclear deterrent to prisons, to hospitals, and we were doing this around the world. It was an organisation that believed fundamentally, it was people there. A lot of them were former public servants. Half the people who worked in Serco had been formerly, and they were there because they believed that public services were really important and needed to be delivered well. And suddenly being accused of lying, cheating, it was devastating to them. And my thing was going around saying, sod it, I'm proud of this company. Look, just look at the stuff that we're doing. And it, I think, helped to stabilise. It also made people realise, I think, that I was there for the long term. Because one of the things that happens when you come in as a new CEO is that there's a period of avoidance.
Yes.
And particularly with any organisation that has big connections with government, they just take, is duck and cover. It's like the 1950s nuclear drills they used to do to school children. Duck and cover. You go under the thing. New boss comes into government department, duck and cover.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to be here for long anyway.
Were you enjoying that challenge? Because as I watch you talk about it, it's I can see the sort of excitement around
Hell yes.
So what's that? What's that about?
Enjoying it.
Because there's a lot of risk in there.
It was I was like, because nobody said it was my fault. No. So I was not there. Everybody knew I might have a big arse, but I didn't have one to cover.
You were free.
I could say to the organisation, really, what's gone on in the past? Okay, we will clear that up. Don't worry. Let's concentrate where we go forward. And taking the organisation forward and getting it to concentrate on the road ahead and making it, helping it to feel that it was not bad. It was not evil. We do good things. Serco to this day does many, many good things.
It strikes me that a sort of sense of fairness is important to you, right? They kind of, the idea that this company actually may have done things wrong, may have made mistakes, but the idea of chucking the entire company under the bus.
Which government would like? There was elements of so. You may remember that one of the things was, do you know what? Serco were even charging us for tagging people who were in prison.
Yes. Or people who were dead. Well, excuse me, how are we, unless government says, these people who we've told you to tag, we've now put into prison. But they never told us. They never said, we've got a death certificate. This person has got a death certificate. Yes.
So it was actually but I don't, it was, those bad things went on, and it was limited to a civil contract, and it's all been subject to endless inquiries. But the fact is that organisation employs 55,000 people around the world who are delivering vital government services.
Yeah.
And it does a good job, and it's important. And a part of the issue, fun enough, that I enjoyed was the debate about whether private companies could provide public services, which is a really fascinating debate, and where the dividing line is between public and...
Yes, and you were happy to dive into that. I mean, you mentioned the shares, which is comms in a way, right? It's definitely leadership and it's motivational. But you also, with the communications, I touched on this earlier, that this is a core skill of yours, is the ability to get out and make the case. And you weren't afraid to do that. With a company that was paralysed with fear, you went out appropriately and at the right moments and strategically.
Well, quite often inappropriately and at the wrong moments. but the fact
your message when you saw an attack against Serco that you considered to be unfair, you would get out and say, "Hang on, we're not going to take." I think your phrase was, "We're not going to take. We're not just going to sit back and continue to take the shit. We are going to deal with it."
No, we're going to deal with it, and we're going to go and not confront is the wrong word, because if you are providing a government service paid for by taxpayers' money, you've got to be prepared to engage with people who think that that's fundamentally wrong. So we had debates about people who believe it's fundamentally wrong that private companies should run prisons. And engaging with that debate and explaining why it's fundamentally right that you have both public and private provision in prisons is really interesting, and it's a non-trivial argument, and it's one that you can't just say, oh well, I'm not going to engage with you on that. You've got to be prepared to do that.
But you engaged on the debate, but you also engaged on the criticism. That's where the we're not going to take any shit anymore bit comes in. That's not on the philosophical argument.
Well,
that's on the
criticism. What we're going to do, we're not going to hide under a hole, pretend and let people without us responding to that and explaining but in a responsible way, because it's public money.
Yes. The Serco story was pretty public. It was, at times pretty unpleasant from a media point of view.
Yeah.
I think I'm right in saying that there were occasions where people would sort of come up to you in the street or when you're out and about doing your work and be abusive.
Yeah.
I mean, A, tell us a little bit about that, but B, I'm interested to know how you sort of protected yourself against that, or how you handled that. Are you someone who takes that stuff home with them?
No. Oh, yes, I do, because I work at home. Because I love my work. I said my children have been brought up with an addict in the house, and my addiction is work. And like all addictions, it's, I don't say this lightly, it has side effects on the family. So my children had to put up with me working weekends and actually preferring, the awful thing is he prefers to be in his office than coming and watch me playing football.
Is that the truth?
I don't know, no comment. But
there've been times.
But there have been times. Of course I did. But we had lovely times. But I'm a work addict. So of course I take it home. But I don't take it. And the other thing is, I think that and it's a thing particularly about Serco, which is delivering government services, you have to be prepared to be held accountable. And if that is from a mother whose son is doing their first night in Thameside Prison, who is desperately upset, feels that that's been mishandled or their belongings have gone to the wrong place, and they have got hold of your email address, always respond. So what some CEOs do is their email address is rcs@office.
Yes.
Mine was, you want to contact, when I was at Serco, rupert.soames@serco.com. Couldn't be easier.
Yeah.
CBI, rupert.soames@serco.org, at cbi.org.uk. I've always put, so people can always find me, because you have to, because it's in half of the thing is being able to put a face to it. And I didn't often get abuse in the streets, but I'm not. I mean, I'm physically quite big, so I wasn't worried about people jumping on top of me. And
but the sort of, there's still the impact of that. Someone coming up and being unpleasant on whatever level. Not a nice thing to experience.
I think it's quite interesting. I mean,
so you engaged.
Well, at least
you engaged.
At least it wakes you up. At least it shows they care, that that you're doing something in their lives that the man. I honestly, I don't do fear, and I don't do hiding. Just don't.
Interesting. I don't do fear.
Well, not fear of people, and it's quite useful in the political context with the CBI and previously with Serco, is that there's a breed of politicians who believe that having got into the role that they have, they are able to intimidate, and that they can go and come hot and heavy on you. And again, this is about balance, because they are elected politicians and I am not. And you've got to be really careful. They have a mandate, I don't. But it's quite important. But I'm just not. They don't scare me. I want to engage with them. I want to persuade them, but don't think that you're. Don't think that you're talking about a person who's been one of the most unpopular people in the press. I've been splattered all over the press. I don't do that sort of. You can't. I don't, and that's good, because you can look them straight in the eye and you can have a meaningful conversation. But just don't try and frighten me, because it doesn't work. Neither should I try to be disrespectful to you. So I think there's this idea of mutual respect.
Yeah, I'm sort of tempted to say that we could... it's never too late when it comes to politics, because that's exactly what we need, a bit of that. Yeah, on the other side of the fence, don't we?
I think that there are a lot of able people in politics.
That's true. But later in life, has there not been?
It is so intense, and so finding a place that you can have an impact on public life in a meaningful way without being completely tied down by the system and the community. Being able to talk freely is something that I find, and that comes back to being the difference between politics and business. One of the things that I notice about this government, the gap of understanding between business and government, how to get things done, seems to me to be getting wider.
Yes.
In my lifetime, that the hinterland of people in government does not really stretch into local businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. And when I go and talk to politicians of both sides of the House, we're doing a lot of work at the moment on the Employment Rights Bill, which the CBI is trying to explain and help government come to a sensible landing place. And part of the problem is that you're dealing with civil servants and often ministers who just don't have that insight into what makes a small business tick. It's not been part of their hinterland.
Yes.
And that is not just of this government, but of previous governments as well. There's been this division between politics and business and life politics has become more professionalised.
Yeah.
Which makes it all the more important that we need to listen attentively to each other, doesn't it?
It does. And that brings us neatly to CBI, because that is one of its purposes. The CBI is there really to argue for British business, and as you just touched on, one might say, given where we are economically right now, that's never been more important. But once again, you arrive into an organisation that's in difficulty, or in the throes of a near-death experience, or perhaps coming out of a near-death experience would be more accurate, as you put it previously. There have been allegations sort of swirling around the leadership that had caused the CBI, severe reputational damage. So again, you've turned Serco around. It's been an epic success for you as a leader, and you think, that's the role for me. I'm going to dive in at the CBI as chair.
Well, I really thought it was important, and I went to meet Rain Newton-Smith, who had, like Cincinnatus, she had dropped everything. She had left the CBI as its chief economist to go to Barclays with a smashing job, and then when asked to, over a weekend, said that she would come back to lead the organisation as its Director General. And she and her team have done have been incredibly resilient in putting in place all those processes and things that you would expect an organisation that has just had a big reputational issue to deal with. My role, as was the case, fun enough, in Aggreko and Serco, I'm not quite sure what the role, but just sort of think of me as a paramedic. I turn up after the event. I'm not there when the crash happens, but I'm there after that. Or like the post-operative...
First responder.
No, I'm not the first responder. I was the sort of second or third responder. And the board there had really, really difficult things to deal with. And it's a member organisation, and it had lost a lot of members. But you said earlier on that the CBI is there to, speak for business. It's more than that. I describe it as the CBI is there to be the Google Translate. And it works both ways, to speak truth
explainer
unto power.
Yeah.
And that means explaining, and we talked about the gap between business and politics, is that a lot of our work is actually explaining to business what government can and cannot do. But we also need, and it's a pressing need, to be able to engage with government, not on a shouty way, but in a way that enables civil servants to engage with policy at a detailed level. So we have got what is probably the largest policy and economics group outside of Whitehall. So on things like the Employment Rights Bill, we are able to engage at a level of detail with the 200 amendments that came out last week to say you could do it this, if you do it this way, it'll work. If you do it that way, it won't. And doing that sort of detailed interaction is what the CBI is about and does really, really well. And I think that the striking oil for me at the CBI was arriving at a time which is in the run-up to an election, because then, two things happened, is that during the crisis of the CBI in 2023, a lot of members left. And by the time I turned up at the end of 2023, they were beginning to say, well, kind of we miss it a bit, actually. And government was saying, okay, we can't meet the CBI, but we quite miss the CBI. So having an organisation that people valued, and now it's been wonderful. I've gone back to being a salesman. I spend, I'm doing 8 calls a day, running through my call list, talking to CEOs and saying, come back. And it's amazing. We've now got nearly all the big members have come back, and we're doing things with the government, and we are influencing things with the government, and we're doing what we should do, and doing, I think, a really important.
And you would say the core lesson here for a business that's in trouble, for whatever reason, is to focus in on your purpose. Ask yourself the hardest question, which is actually, are we needed? Is there something here that we can provide of genuine worth? And you would say that the CBI, in its darkest hour, if you like, was able to look hard at itself and say, do you know what, we need to survive. Right, there is a purpose.
There is a purpose, and for your customers to realise that you serve a purpose. One of the things with Serco was government would have dearly liked to say, no more contracts for Serco. Away with them. But it couldn't, because there were so many contracts. So actually there had to be an accommodation in the middle between us saying we've done terrible things wrong, we're horribly sorry, we're going to make these right, and government saying, we're going to oversee you, making sure you get things right, but actually, we don't want you to go. And a similar thing with the CBA is that British business discovering that it needs a voice of the scale and of the research and the capability that the CBI has got to be able to affect government. Now, there's so much stuff going on in the world. We've got the renegotiation of the terms of the terms of trade with the EU. We've got a country where the level of debt is too high. We've got public services that are not well run. We've got a whole lot of challenges to do that. And
sounds like the addiction level is perhaps ticking on the more active end of the spectrum.
The awful thing is I had retired.
Right. It doesn't sound much like a retirement, Rupert.
It's a new definition of the word retirement. But I'm also then chair of another public company called Smith & Nephew. So I don't know how your hips and knees are, but, we'll be happy to look at those. So that's all fun.
Rupert Soames, thank you so much for joining us on Crisis What Crisis. It's been a proper conversation, for which I'm very grateful, and I'm sure that those listening, watching will feel the same way. Thank you for being so honest with us.
Thank you.
We started Crisis What Crisis in the hope of creating a place where those who've been through trauma, whatever its cause, could tell their stories safely, and in the knowledge that what they had to share would be treated with respect and put to work, if you like, in a way that would be useful to others. That Rupert chose to tell his story for the first time to us is properly meaningful for all of us who work on this podcast. He wanted to show that even the worst of crises can be overcome, and that a happy and productive life can be achieved. The key to this, in Rupert's view, was that the abuse was discussed among his family and close friends whilst he was still young, and that the perpetrator, of course, was dealt with through the courts. He recognises the role his loving family played in enabling him to move forward. The abuse he suffered, though, has not defined Rupert's life, and it therefore did not define our episode, which was so full of humour, of insight and of advice that anyone seeking to progress in life, in business or elsewhere, will want to listen to. So many takeaways, in particular around what makes a leader. Consistency of message and action first and foremost. And courage, something Rupert is not short of. If you've been left feeling inspired, please do leave us a review. And if you found this episode useful, we would be delighted if you shared it with your friends and network. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts along with helpful links are available on our website. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thanks also to the Crisis What Crisis team, Jane Sankey, Hannah Walker-Brown, and Bill Griffin, and the brilliant people at Global. And thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, you see